welcome back to the IEA channel. I'm Emily Carver, Head of Media at the IEA, and today I'm joined by our Head of Lifestyle Economics, Christopher Snowdon, our Head of Regulatory Affairs, Victoria Hewson, and Economics Fellow, Julian Jessop, to look ahead at the coming year. If you missed our year in review special of Live with Littlewood, you can catch up on it on our YouTube channel, or if you prefer, you can listen on Podbean, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Today, we're going to be looking ahead to the new year. After a tumultuous 2020, what can we expect from the year ahead? It's hardly been the fresh start we were hoping for, as the country has plunged back into a national lockdown, but are there reasons for optimism as we start the new year? So Julian, let's start with you. You're probably one of the more optimistic among us, at least when it comes to the economy. You've been relatively cool-headed about the debt we've accrued during this period. You can also read Julian's recent briefing on the public finances on our website. How confident are you that the economy will bounce back in 2021?
Well, it's hard, of course, to be too confident about anything, given the shocks we've had over the last year. And this crisis is still unprecedented in a great many ways. But I would still be optimistic, and in particular, I still think there's a good chance that the level of economic activity gets back to the sorts of place that it was before the pandemic struck by the end of this year, and that's probably a year or two or more than many people currently think. And there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, first of all, I do think that the new vaccines are a game changer. They do provide light at the end of the tunnel. So although the next few weeks and maybe months are clearly going to be very difficult, at least there's now a clear way out of it. What's more, we've already got some evidence that the second lockdown, the England lockdown at least in November, had a much smaller negative impact on the economy than the first one. So that's sort of evidence that the economy is starting to adapt, and those businesses that can still be open are able to work within the new rules. And then the third point is that there's now, of course, an enormous amount of policy stimulus in place. I mean, I feel uncomfortable with how big the budget deficit is at the moment and how loose monetary policy is. But that provides an enormous amount of stimulus that I think will allow the economy to recover quickly as the restrictions were lifted. And we actually got a taste of that in the summer. Over the summer, before the second lockdown, the economy was rebounding a lot more quickly than people were anticipating. So with unemployment still relatively low and most businesses, as far as they can be, shielded by one form of government support or another, I think we'll be pleasantly surprised about how well the UK economy does recover from the spring onwards as the restrictions are finally lifted.
Chris, you've written a lot about the impact of these regulations on the hospitality sector. How do you think the outlook is looking for that sector, that industry that's been, as you said, sort of used as a scapegoat throughout this pandemic?
It's looking absolutely dire for the hospitality sector. And the hospitality sector is just kind of one of the more visible sectors, really, that's been, if not killed off, then certainly severely incapacitated. I mean, my view is more or less the exact opposite of Julian's, and has been throughout. I'm the kind of gloomy yang to his yin. I think it's certainly theoretically possible that there will be a strong rebound, and that all the money that's been spent will be enough to have put large sections of the economy into hibernation, and it can be it can be defrosted and everything go back to normal. I just don't think it'll happen for two main reasons. One, I think that the support now being given to businesses is just inadequate. £9,000 to get businesses through a lockdown that could last months, I mean, certainly will last, I think, 2 months, is just not enough for so many of these businesses. And the other thing is, I don't think there will be a quick rebound. It is true that a lot of households, on average at least, have more money to spend, and in theory they could come out and spend it all. But firstly, I think we're looking at a pretty shaky economy in 2021, to put it mildly, probably a pretty shaky job market. So people would be wise, I think, probably to put money aside rather than go on some splurge. Secondly, you can't make up for all the lost spending. I mean, you're not going to go out and have 7 haircuts in a week just because you didn't have very many in 2020. So, and also I think the government is going to cock up the vaccination. I think it's going to take a very, very long time. And as a result, there won't be a single day where we can say things are going back to normal. It will be a very slow process. Chris Whitty and Valence and Sage will insist on the reintroduction of the tier system for a large part of next year. So people will not be able to spend their money in a normal way for, I think, the next 6 months, and they probably will be disinclined to do so anyway. And as a result, I think very large parts of the economy, including hospitality, but also things like cinemas and travel and many other areas, will be permanently, or not permanently, but in the kind of medium to fairly long term, hampered, very severely hampered. The economy has shrunk by about 12%. It's going to shrink more in this quarter. It almost certainly shrunk in the last quarter. And there is, I still think, a very real worry about unemployment rocketing up, and that then leading to a spiral of decline.
Victoria, I must get your view on this as well before we move on. What do you think? Are you more gloomy or are you more optimistic about the economic outlook in general?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm pretty gloomy and tend more towards Chris's outlook. What I can probably foresee is what JP Morgan and the World Economic Forum were talking about as a K-shaped recovery, where some sectors of the economy, namely tech and larger firms, big business, do very well, but small businesses and poor people do very badly. And there's this sort of K-shaped divergence depending on who's going to benefit from lockdowns. Well, obviously Amazon and Tesco's and those kinds of businesses have done very well, and small businesses on the high street and in hospitality have done very badly. And I think the repercussions of that will be quite serious economically and also societally, as to how that will play out in how people will react over the coming years to that kind of situation, and also the policy implications, as governments will be scrambling to make good the losers. And I think that's my slightly gloomy prediction.
Chris, moving on to more general question of freedom and civil liberties, you wrote a paper back in early May flagging how we should be wary of the unprecedented laws and regulations that were introduced in last March. What does the outlook for freedom look like in 2021? Could we perhaps be getting to the point where restrictions become the norm and are used as a tool, say, every time the NHS is under pressure again?
Well, it's possible, isn't it? And it is a worry. I would be surprised, actually. I don't quite buy into this idea that people have just become so used to this kind of thing that they would put up with it every time the NHS is under a bit of pressure. I'm sure some people will propose it every winter, because the NHS is genuinely in crisis every winter, unlike most other health systems around the world, incidentally. But Whitty did suggest that there might be need for restrictions. I mean, he wasn't talking about lockdown. In fact, he made it very clear he wasn't talking about lockdown. I don't really know what he was talking about, really. Maybe a little bit of social distancing, maybe some mask wearing. I don't know. But I think people will absolutely have had enough of it by then. So I'm not too concerned. I am more concerned about the kind of broader climate of sort of health and safety, if you want to call it that we've seen over the course of the last 9 months. I think most people, including most libertarians, can see that you have very clear negative externalities associated with infectious diseases, and that in extreme cases that can justify some pretty extreme action. But I think once this is over or dying down, that element of it will be forgotten about in public health, and issues such as drinking and smoking and obesity will be viewed as suitable targets for coercion, more so than ever. And I think you will hear a lot about, for example, you hear people talking about the smoking epidemic or the drinking pandemic. They already sometimes call these things epidemics, but now they call them pandemics because it rings more of a bell with people, and it seems to justify more coercion. So yeah, I think it's a concern that we've already seen kind of proven, I guess, with the whole anti-obesity strategy that was announced in July, supposedly as a direct response to COVID, even though most of it's not coming until 2022. Hopefully they don't think COVID's going to be a problem in 2022. I expect to see quite a bit of that now. People have been softened up by such an extreme and draconian measure as lockdown. Almost any policy seems moderate in comparison, and people are always able to reel off statistics about tens of thousands of people dying of this, that, and the other, and the fact that there aren't really any negative externalities associated with these things will be quietly forgotten.
Julian and Victoria, are you both confident that our freedoms will be restored?
Well, I think certainly in economic terms, there's clearly a lot more enthusiasm now for state intervention of one type or another. So if you like, the Overton window has been thrown firmly open to the left. So the fact that the government, during a crisis when it itself has shut down large parts of the market economy, has had to step in and spend hundreds of billions of pounds. I think that was justified in the circumstances. But I saw some people are reading across from that to say that the government should continue to be as actively involved as it is now, even when things start to return to some form of normal. So loads of ideas that, hopefully have been battered away are coming back to the front again. So things like a hugely expensive universal basic income that would give loads of money to people who don't really need it, things like that. Mass nationalisation again of whole swathes of the economy, and lots of suggestions about how to pay for all of this. Things like massive expansion of wealth taxes and so on that would be both unfair and economically inefficient. So I would be worried that having seen this big ratcheting up in the size of the state and the amount of public spending, as we've seen in previous crises, it will be very hard to roll the state back again. I think that's going to be one of the really big challenges for free marketeers, economists or civil libertarians over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's right. As the old saying goes, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary measure. Didn't we say income tax was instituted in the Napoleonic Wars as a temporary measure, and there's very little chance of that being rolled back. And I'm worried that we have set some precedents here, and that maybe those of us on the free market side potentially did sell the pass a bit by accepting the measures right at the outset, albeit in a climate of uncertainty and fear. But now the spell is broken. And the left can claim now every time we resist nationalisation or resist bailouts of companies or any of these other interventions and micromanagement of the economy.
Or printing money. I mean, that's the big one.
Printing money.
Printing vast amounts of money, which now seems to be perfectly all right and it's not going to lead to any problems.
Yeah, so now it's quite, it's quite hard to argue that that's a terrible thing and we shouldn't do it because, we've just done it and we're probably going to continue to do it, all under a Conservative government as well. And, to say nothing of the civil liberties aspects. I think it was Neil Ferguson said in his interview with the Times the other day that public health and epidemiological experts never thought they would get away with these kinds of restrictions until they gradually became normalized by First of all, I think it was Italy was the first sort of Western liberal democracy to suddenly accept that Chinese-style lockdowns were a thing. And I think we might well come to regret accepting all of that in principle at the time, because, authorities and governments aren't well known for relinquishing powers once they have them.
Yeah, Victoria, looking to Brexit, because of course before the pandemic hit that was all we were talking about really. So we've negotiated a free trade agreement. How optimistic are you? I know you've written recently about how the UK government is more than capable of coming up with its own burdensome regulations. Will we make the most of this opportunity in 2021?
Yeah, it's a mixed picture. I mean, generally speaking, I'm not particularly optimistic that we will make the most of these new regulatory freedoms that we have. Because, we are actually, all the while, whilst EU members, we have gone for a gold-plating super equivalence sort of approach. And even now, we are hell-bent on extra regulations of online platforms through the Online Harms or Online Safety Bill, as I think it's now going to be called. We are going ahead and implementing the EU's Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which will empower Ofcom to regulate video sharing platforms and video on demand. to give just a couple of examples from the digital sector. On the other hand, there have been a couple of quite promising developments. We're not going to be implementing the EU's copyright directive, which is good, and there are some useful signs coming from financial services that we might use some of our ability to diverge in ways that are quite promising. But again, even in financial services, lots of the worst excesses of EU regulation, some of the most problematic bits of MiFID II, for example, were UK originated. We've always tried to go super equivalent and have stricter capital requirements, resolution and recovery requirements. So, the opportunity is there to do better. And actually, even on the controversial level playing field measures on things like workers' employment law and environment, although we're bound to a sort of non-regression, we could still change and improve those regulations as long as we keep to a broad standard of protecting rights. So there is flexibility there. But all we seem to hear at the moment is going hell for leather to ban junk food advertising, which I'm sure Chris will come on to. We want to use our new freedoms in trade policy to ban fur imports, all of these things that are actually quite illiberal. So we on the free market side need to really be making our case very strongly and try and prise the Overton window slightly back in our direction.
Julian, I was going to ask the question, will COVID make us more socialist? How will we begin to step back from the vast increase in the size and power of the state that this crisis has necessitated? But you and Chris have sort of touched on that, but I just wondered if you had anything to add on that.
Well, it might make some people more socialist. I mean, some people would look at this crisis and say, how wonderfully the NHS has performed, though, as Chris has hinted, actually, it's probably done worse than many healthcare systems in the rest of Europe.
Thursday clap is back.
Yeah, it is, dear God.
It's not, is it?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I'd be out there clapping, bus drivers and taxi drivers and so on, as well as NHS workers. But anyway, there are some people who will see this as a good example of how, the state, a bigger state is a good thing. Equally, though, if you look at many of the things that have happened, they've actually not really been about the state. So if we look at the vaccine itself, I mean, that's been created by, competition between private pharmaceutical companies who've done a fantastic job at innovating and coming up with something a lot quicker than many people anticipated. If anything, the state has got in the way. You can see that particularly the different speed of the rollouts in the UK compared to many countries in the European Union, the way the European Union has gone slow on approving the new vaccine and rolling it out. And many other ways. So, for example, more flexible working. The government sort of said, we'd like people to work from home if they can. It's private companies, private businesses, households who've worked out the best way to do that. I think it's pretty incredible the way that markets have adapted. If we take the retail sector, it's absolutely true that many physical shops have been hit very hard by this. But because of the flexibility of the market economy, it's not the NHS that's delivering food to people. It's private companies like Ocado that have stepped up and done these things. So although there have been some areas where the state has had to step in and fill in the gaps, I think a lot of what we've seen over the last year has been a testimony to the flexibility of a free market economy. And let's face it, the profit motive, or the importance of companies improving their public image and maybe doing things at a loss, but that's still in their long-term interest to do so. So I could point to at least as many examples of how COVID should have made us more free markety rather than more socialist.
So to finish, I wanted to ask a few sort of quick questions just to finish off with some predictions for the year ahead. Chris, shall I start with you? What's your top prediction for the year ahead?
Well, I'm pretty hopeless at making predictions, but I've been gloomy about the economy for the last 10 months or so, and I'll continue doing that. I will predict that, certainly that all the OBR's predictions are too optimistic. It's not their fault. They kind of assume that there isn't going to be a lockdown again all the time. I think 4 million people unemployed. I think most people seem to think that's unlikely. I think it is pretty likely. I think the only thing that stop it happening would be if a lot of the redundancies, which are at record highs at the moment, by the way, 900,000 towards the end of last year, if a lot of these redundancies are people who are from the EU or indeed anywhere else in the world, I think there's quite a bit of evidence that those people are just going home, so they don't really count in the unemployment figures. Now, obviously, there's a kind of lump of labour fallacy there. It still makes things worse and leads to more unemployment potentially. But I think we'll see at least 4 million people once this plaster is ripped away of the furlough. You know, we have no idea really what state the economy's in. And we won't do until the furlough ends and the cash grants end, and then we'll see who's been swimming naked, as they say. So I think there's going to be high unemployment. That's my big fear, and I think that could easily lead to a downward spiral for the reasons I've kind of already outlined.
So Chris paints a pretty bleak image for the future there. Victoria, what's your top prediction?
Well, I'm going to go quite narrow and specific and say that we should all be watching out for what's going to happen on the Irish Sea border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That was all sort of rushed through, and various measures have been implemented to try and smooth the access of businesses in Northern Ireland to Great Britain, and obviously as well the trade from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, which is the most problematic part. We've already seen pictures of empty supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland, and a lot of very angry, especially unionists in Northern Ireland, who feel like constitutionally they've basically been abandoned. So and as well, this will have great implications for what I was mentioning earlier about what the UK's regulatory policy is going to be like, because there's a strong possibility that in order to smooth things between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, we will also keep a hold of EU regulations, so as not to create barriers between the two parts of the United Kingdom. Obviously, the EU isn't reciprocating and giving us any mutual recognition in return, so they played a blinder negotiating that for sure. But I hopefully it will all work out and the systems will bed in. But otherwise, I can see some real difficulties, both politically, given the situation in Northern Ireland generally, but also economically for what is already one of the poorest parts of the United Kingdom.
And Julian, what would your top prediction be?
Well, I'm going to sneakily put in two, and one is a sort of more optimistic view on the UK economy. So pretty much, the opposite of what Chris was saying. So unemployment remaining low even after the end of the furlough, and economic activity back to pre-COVID levels much quicker than most people anticipate. The second one, and the two actually slightly related, is sort of a turning point in sentiment about Brexit. I think most people would agree that so far the vote to leave the European Union has been negative for the economy, primarily because of the uncertainty that it's caused, and that's held back business investment in particular. But even during this difficult period, the UK has retained its sort of high ranking in the various surveys of the attractiveness of an economy as somewhere to invest. So I think that now we have a bit more clarity about what Brexit is actually going to look like, despite the obvious problems it's caused in some aspects of our trade with the EU. I think the investment will start to recover a bit more quickly. While at the same time, people will start to be a bit more aware of the disadvantages of being in the EU. I mean, we can argue about exactly how much freedom the UK would have had on things like the vaccine or the tampon tax or a number of other issues outside the EU. But there's no doubt that we do seem to be doing some good things more quickly than those countries that remain a part of the European Union itself. So I think there might be a switch in the balance here. We're starting to see some of the positives of Brexit and the lifting of uncertainty, while at the same time, some of the advantages of being a member of the EU will start to lose their shine.
Now, this sort of is perhaps similar to the first question, but perhaps you can give a different answer. Chris, what do you think the biggest opportunity for free marketeers is in the year coming in 2021, and the biggest challenge?
Well, I mean, there's so many challenges, aren't there? I mean, the economy's in such a dire state. It hardly needs to. We don't really need to go over that again. But in terms of opportunities, look, there are three things the government could do to avert catastrophe. I mean, things are still going to be bad regardless, but it could avert catastrophe if it acts very soon. One of them is to get this vaccine out. If it can make the target of 14 million people vaccinated by the middle of February, then that would be an enormous boost, because it means we could start getting back to normal about a month later, perhaps. I don't think it will do that, but it could do. I just think the NHS and public health in England are just too incompetent. But in theory, it could do it, and it would do a lot of good, save us a lot of money. The second thing is we need to give more money to businesses in these cash grants. I mentioned before that it's just inadequate. It seems crazy to me to have spent so much money keeping these zombie businesses going to let them down at the last minute. And the third thing, and this is a real opportunity, is Brexit. We need to have tremendous growth. We're going to see growth figures towards the end of next year, which are very flattering. We still won't be anywhere near back to where we begun. We need to have real growth. We need to put burners underneath the economy, and Brexit gives us a great opportunity to do that, because we can deregulate in areas where we should never have regulated in the first place, in some cases because the regulation was there to suit people on the continent rather than to suit Britain. There are plenty of examples of this. My fear is, however, that it won't really happen. Victoria's already mentioned all the various bans that the government wants to bring in as a kind of free and sovereign nation. There are lots of things where it should be getting rid of bans and unnecessary regulation. So far, it's just got rid of the tax on tampons, as far as I can see. It needs to be going around speaking to small businesses in particular, because big businesses tend to like regulation once they're in. It needs to speak to small businesses who are being hampered by regulations, find out from each sector, what are the things we can do to help you now? Again, I fear it won't do that, but if it wanted to avert a catastrophe, it would do those three things.
Victoria, as our head of regulatory affairs, is Brexit the big opportunity, or are there others to look for?
No, Brexit is a big opportunity, and I think one potential, opportunity that also in combination with Brexit could come out of the coronavirus pandemic and crisis is potentially an appetite to deregulate and improve the environment for innovation and research in pharmaceuticals and medicine and healthcare, so that, you know, we've already seen being able to expedite approval of the vaccine was a huge benefit that was made possible by Brexit, despite claims to the contrary. I don't think there's any question that if we had still been full member states, we would have gone along with the EU solidarity centralised initiative that the other member states have all pursued. The other great opportunity that comes out of Brexit, where I think we do have some real political will behind it, is in pursuing free trade agreements with countries around the world. The Department for International Trade did a pretty great job in the past year or so, and so great opportunity there. Obviously, the big one to watch will be with the United States, with the incoming president there. Also, not really the Democrats, unfortunately, contrary to what people might wish, in comparison to the sort of Trumpian, quite protectionist policies of the outgoing administration. I don't think we can particularly expect a great flowering of outgoing free trade policy being pursued by the Biden administration, but it's still a definite live possibility that our free trade agreement with the United States might progress in the coming year, which would be a fantastic opportunity.
And Julian, what opportunity do you see facing us in 2021?
Well, here again, I think I agree more than I disagree with both Chris and Victoria. So as far as Brexit is concerned, in particular, I mean, getting back sovereignty, control of your regulation, your trade policies, and so on is only half the battle, and arguably less than that if you don't then do anything sensible with that. And I've been quite depressed over the last year or so about how much of the debate from the government about Brexit has been about doing things like increasing state subsidies of one form or another, which is not the Brexit I voted for, to want a better way of putting it. I think we should be using this opportunity to scale back the role of the states, whether it's our state or somebody else's in this case. So I would be worried that Brexit might be used as an opportunity actually to increase regulation rather than decrease it as it should be. I am a bit more optimistic about certain other things. I do think that there are lots of ways in which the UK economy has stood out for a number of years, even as a member of the EU, as relatively flexible, a low tax, light touch regulation environment. And I think that those benefits become all the more important as Europe heads increasingly in the other direction. But that's important, therefore, that we don't continue to follow or even lead the EU in areas like, for example, the digital services tax, which I absolutely hate as a piece of economics. And we seem to be a sort of European leader in that, whereas in fact we should be heading in exactly the opposite direction. The digital economy is clearly going to be extremely important in driving future productivity and growth. And I think the best way the government can support that is by getting out of the way rather than trying to intervene in it even further.
So lastly, before we finish, Chris, who do you think will be the winner of 2021, or alternatively, who's the one to watch? It could be a country, a politician, someone else.
I don't know who the winner is going to be. It's certainly not going to be me. The one to watch, I think, is whatever replaces Public Health England. Public Health England was disbanded, or at least the announcement was made in July that it was going to be disbanded. It's still hanging around like the proverbial bad smell. It's going to have its main duties taken on by something called the National Institute for Health Protection, which is basically just going to do what the Health Protection Agency did, which is a precursor to Public Health England. However, I strongly suspect that they're going to set up some other organization to do all the nanny state stuff, and all the various so-called stakeholders are discussing this with the government now. So I think there will be some new gravy train for the nanny state to ride at some point this year, and it could be even worse than Public Health England, and even more wasteful and inefficient and bossy. So I don't think Public Health England will go away, and it'd be interesting to see actually how many people from Public Health England end up working for this new organisation. But the government had a great opportunity to basically get rid of all the nanny state rubbish and just have a central organisation that dealt with genuine public health issues like COVID-19. But I think the lobbying from the nanny state industry will be too much, particularly with all this obesity stuff that's on its way, which is also something to watch. A whole slew of policies designed to change what we eat, which is all sorts of terrible, negative, unintended consequences associated with that. But yeah, the nanny state is not dead. It just smells funny.
So we've got to keep our eye on the National Institute for Health Protection.
Probably not them. They'd probably be okay. If they just duplicate what the Health Protection Agency did, there'd just be a load of serious scientists getting quietly on with a job of looking out for infectious diseases. I think there'll be another organisation set up that will be Public Health England by another name.
Victoria, who's going to be your winner for 2021?
Well, it's actually similar to Chris. My one to watch is a new regulatory body, the Digital Markets Unit that's being established within the Competition and Markets Authority, specifically to look into and try and regulate away the dominance of big tech, the digital giants, and the large incumbents in that space. The government has decided that there's a lack of competition in that area that's very specific to the digital giants, and so they are going to produce a code of practice to tell them how to run their business in allegedly a more consumer-friendly, pro-competition way. And I guess ultimately what they're trying to do is to try and chip away at the competitive advantages that the large incumbents now have, thanks to masses of digital regulation coming from other sources. So they're layering regulation on regulation to try and undo the damage to competition caused by things like the GDPR and other similar sort of initiatives. So that's one to watch, and I guess I fear that the winners there are going to be bureaucrats and vested interests.
Right, so bureaucrats and vested interests are going to be the winners of 2021. Julian, do you agree? Do you have a winner?
Well, maybe just two people to watch. I mean, one I think was a winner from last year, which is, of course, Liz Truss, the Secretary for International Trade. I mean, she had one job last year, and she did it, much better than many people anticipated. A lot of the relatively negative assessments of the economic impact of Brexit, assumed it would be many years before able to replicate or improve upon the trade deals that we already had by virtue of our membership of the EU, and I mean she's pretty much done that already. So I think that's been a big plus, and of course the challenge for her this year will be to develop that into new trade deals with countries that we don't currently have arrangements with. So that is one person to watch. A winner from last year, will she be able to maintain that winning streak? And the other person to watch from, if you like, from the other side is Annalise Dodds, so the shadow chancellor. Again, I think most people would say that Rishi Sunak was one of the winners of 2020, but in a sense he had a relatively easy job, which is just spending enormous amounts of other people's money, or as Chris would say, newly printed money from the Bank of England. So I think he's going to find it much harder this year and beyond, particularly if he starts talking again about the prospect of tax increases or austerity by any other name. So it'll be very interesting to see how much of a challenge he faces from his opposite number. And I think Annalise Dodds has been a bit in the background, of course, over the last year, because there's been a sort of broad consensus about what needed to be done during the crisis. But as we slowly emerge from it, then I think she might get a higher profile, and is, I think, frankly, growing into her brief. So it'll be very interesting to see how she does as the rival to Rishi Sunak as the potential chancellor.
Interesting. Well, it's going to be an interesting year ahead. Some cause for optimism, perhaps, but it's looking like a bit of a gloomy start, at least. Thank you so much for joining me, Victoria, Chris, and Julian. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You can also listen to this discussion as a podcast if you prefer on Podbean, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Thanks for watching.